there's also the feeling not being able to do anything with it, you know. And then after a while, you think, well, yeah, what's next, and what am I doing with this? What do you think about that?
I know that there's a paradox in the U.S. of the people who get powerful jobs tend to go to really good schools, and often in school you study the liberal arts, which is philosophy, and classical stuff, and languages, and it's all very much about the nobility, the human spirit, and broadening the mind. And then from that, you go to a specialized school to learn how to sue people or to figure out how to write copy that will make people buy a certain kind of SUV. And yeah, I mean, it's I don't know what I think about it other than that. I'm not sure really that it's ever been all that different. There are things about my job I don't like, but this is one of them that I do like, is that I get to use pretty much everything I've ever learned or think about. And it's actually something that goes a long way when I bitch and moan about, sometimes it's lonely work, and sometimes, you worry that it's not very good. I know that there is, at least in America, an entire class of, and now I'm talking about a very specific class here. I'm talking about upper and upper middle class kids whose parents could afford to send them to very good schools where they got very good educations, who are often working in jobs that are financially rewarding, but don't have anything to do with what they got taught, persuasively taught, was important and worthwhile in school.
Yeah, okay, I'll leave my number.
There's a particular ethos in U.S. culture, especially in entertainment and marketing culture, that very much appeals to people as individuals, that you don't have to be devoted or subservient to anything else. There is no larger good than your own good and your own happiness. The root in English of addict is the Latin addicere, which means religious devotion. It was an attribute of beginning monks, I think. We all worship, and we all have a religious impulse. We can choose to an extent what we worship, but the myth that we worship nothing and give ourselves away to nothing is simply sets us up to give ourselves away to something different. For instance, pleasure, or drugs, or the idea of having a lot of money and being able to buy nice stuff. Or in the tennis academy, it's somewhat different. It's devotion to an athletic pursuit that requires a certain amount of sacrifice and discipline, but is nevertheless an individual sport, and one is trying to get ahead as an individual. With an American idea, and not a universal one, but one that I think kids get exposed to very early, that you are the most important, and what you want is the most important, and that your job in life is to gratify your own desires. That's a little crude to say it that way, but in fact, it's something of the ideology here. It's certainly the ideology that's perpetrated by television and advertising and entertainment. The economy thrives on it. This is one enormous engine and temple of self-gratification and self-advancement, and in some ways it works very, very well. In other ways, it doesn't work all that well, because at least for me, it seems as if there are whole other parts of me that need to worry about things larger than me, that don't get nourished in that system.
My brother's children are very badly behaved, and he spanks them.
language like that, the wounded inner child, the inner pain, is part of a kind of pop psychological movement in the United States that is a sort of popular Freudianism that has its own paradox, which is that the more we're taught to list and resent the things of which we were deprived as children, the more we live in that anger and frustration, and the more we remain children.
Why can't I talk to you?
Betty, you can talk to me. But you know, I'm a child psychiatrist.
To the extent that I understand it, being what you call grown up isn't a lot of fun a lot of the time. There are things you have to do. There are things you want to do that you can't do for a variety of reasons. And I think for young people in America, there are very mixed messages from the culture. That there's a streak of moralism in American life that extols the virtues of being grown up and having a family and being a responsible citizen. But there's also the sense of do what you want, gratify your appetites, because when I'm a corporation, appealing to the parts of you that are selfish and self-centered and want to have fun all the time is the best way to sell you things, right? American economic and cultural systems that work very well in terms of selling people products and keeping the economy thriving do not work as well when it comes to educating children or helping us help each other know how to live and to be happy. If that word means anything, clearly it means something different from whatever I want to do. I want to take this cup and throw it right now. I have every right to, I should. You know, I mean, that we see it with children. That's not happiness. That feeling of having to obey every impulse and gratify every desire it seems to me to be a strange kind of slavery. Nobody talks about it as such, though. It talks about freedom of choice, and you have the right to have things, and spend this much money and you can have this stuff. Again, saying it this way, it sounds to me very crude and very simple, but that's sort of the way.
Now I know what you're thinking. What can I do? Well, you can either sit there and do nothing, or you can start by getting some information on how you can help stop land abuse.
A term that's rarely used here anymore. And see, and now I feel embarrassment because I'm going to sound like my grandfather or something. But the word citizen, the idea of being a citizen, it would be to understand your country's history and the things about it that are good and not so good and how the system works, and taking the trouble to learn about candidates for political office, which means often reading stuff, which isn't fun. Sometimes it's boring. But when people don't do that, here's what happens. The candidates win who have the most money to buy television advertisements, because television advertisements are all most voters know about the candidates. Therefore, we get candidates who are beholden to large donors and become, in some ways, corrupt, which disgusts the voters and makes the voters even less interested in politics, less willing to read and do the work and do the work of citizenship. When I was a little boy, there was a class called Citizenship, and here are certain things about America and America's history. Here's why it's important to vote. Here's why it's important not just to go in and vote for who the best-looking candidate is. I don't think it's very complicated, and I don't think I've named the only reason for it. The paradox is that sort of tension and complication and conflict in people also makes them very easy to market to, because I can say to you, feeling uneasy, life feels empty. Well, here's something you can buy or something you can go do. It makes us. It makes for the economics term is inelasticity of demand. I demand all the time, no matter what the price of it is, and it works really well in an economic way. Emotionally, spiritually, in terms of citizenship, in terms of feeling like a meaningful part even of this country, forget the world. And I'm sure the U.S. government's sort of arrogance and disdain for the rest of the world is unpleasant, but it's also a natural extension of certain cultural messages we send ourselves about ourselves that work very well in some ways and make us very rich and very powerful. It's all complicated. When I was young, or younger, there's a way in which we in America are comfortable, very comfortable, and I used to think that some of the political and social answers that some of the political and social corrections that I thought should be brought about would happen when there was some sort of cataclysm or misfortune where we weren't as comfortable anymore. The fact that we now have clear evidence that the way we live and the relationships we have with various other countries are causing some people to hate us so much that they want to kill us, and may succeed in killing a great many of us, frightens me only because well, when I was growing up, one of the mythological periods for us growing up is the Great Depression, where the story goes, everyone pulled together. There were hard times and no one had enough, but everyone pulled together and everybody. It seems to me now that the country's reaction to feeling frightened and insecure is to buy sports utility vehicles that are large and massive and tank-like and make individual people feel safer, but also get 4 miles to the gallon in a country where gasoline is probably 1/5 as expensive as it ought to be, and yet are voting for people who are deciding to go over and very possibly kill hundreds of thousands of civilians in order to kill a few enemies.
I want al-Baghdadi. Get him. And they got him.
None of which is important, but the fact that no one here is talking about the connection between how we live and what we drive, and the things that are happening, the speed with which it's become.
Why do they hate us?
Those bad people, those bad fanatics, they're evil. What they really hate is our freedom and our way of life, which is just hard to swallow, right? Like, who hates freedom? Yeah. People hate people, not freedom.
They hate our freedoms.
I now don't know what's going to happen, and I am as an American as scared. Not since I was a little boy and I worried about the U.S. and the Soviet Union having an intercontinental number.
And then dinner.
Not since that have I been this scared. And this is totally personally, but I'm more scared of us than I am of anybody else, and that's a bleak place to be. I don't think this is an evil country. I don't think American people are evil. I think we've had it very easy materially for a long time, and we've gotten very little help in understanding things that are important besides being comfortable. And I don't think anybody knows how we will react if things get really hard here. And the fact that we're strong militarily and economically is a good thing, but it's also a frightening thing.